Welcome to Mainland, your local regional television station. I'm Graham O'Brien, and some of the stories coming up in today's news. A Nelson play that will touch the heart, rental survey confirms what most suspected, and much more. An accident on Tuesday evening has resulted in 2 West Coast women being flown to hospital by the Nelson Marlborough Rescue helicopter. The 2 19-year-old women were returning from a ski trip in the Rainbow Valley Access Road when they lost control of their vehicle near the top house. The vehicle had rolled multiple times before coming to rest in a shallow creek bed. The 2 women freed themselves and were assisted by passing motorists who called emergency services. One had received only minor injuries, however the other had received head and neck injuries. The 2 women were treated at the scene and then flown by the rescue helicopter to Nelson Hospital. Local Nelson identity and author Graham Walker has just published a book titled The Man from Cester 5 and Other Short Stories. I spoke to him about what he has wrapped up in his new book's pages. Graham Walker, thanks very much for coming in and talking to us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
You've got a new book out, and can you tell us a little bit about the book and the inspiration you had to write it?
Yes, well, it's a book of short stories which are basically surreal, science fiction, and some of them are based more on reality, but it's classified as fiction as far as I'm concerned. The inspiration was basically I'm getting to the stage of being an ancient. So being an ancient, you can't do as much physical work. So I've always had an interest in writing and have done other work, and it's been basically a family tradition for 150 years, I suppose. And I'm the sort of the arse end of it, really. It ranged from the great writers like Robert Louis Stevenson, who I'm not directly descended from because he didn't have any direct descendants, but he's of the same family, and I was brought up on this by my mother particularly, so I started writing poetry when I was about 10.
Oh.
And occasionally got lauded for it, other times got rubbished for it.
As you do.
So that was basically that, and I enjoy writing short stories, and it keeps your brain working. You can conceive new things. You can have a crack at the people you don't like, I suppose. And although I like most people, but bureaucrats get under my skin. So therefore, I have a bit of a go at them in some of these ones. But I put it into the form, a surreal form, because life follows pretty closely a surreal science fiction form, and you can emphasise the stupidities and particularly of how we say our local bodies and things, but I won't go into that too much because it's patently obvious to everybody what they're like, you know. So.
Are you talking about that it sort of reflects what's happened in your life, but it's science fiction? That's quite a different way of looking at things.
Oh, well, I mean, I like fantasy, and life is a fantasy, really. I mean, we all live our own little fantasies in our lives, plus what we do out in the public. Some people might sort of pretend they're the Prime Minister and not be. The Prime Minister might pretend he is an ordinary guy on the street, which once upon a time I believe he was. So there's a very great similarity, and you can bring these things into short stories and say things that you probably couldn't say otherwise as science fiction. Some of the stories are fairly real because I had quite a business background, both in law, economics, and also in philosophy. That wasn't the business side philosophy, but it was the training, the university type of training. So I met some very interesting people, both internationally and here in New Zealand. Stories that you can tell once they're dead, of course. So we make them into a surreal.
It's very interesting. And you say you're not a direct descendant from Robbie Louis Stevenson, but you are a descendant in some way.
Yes. There were 4 basic families very closely related in Scotland. There were the Stevensons, the Millers, where I descended from, the Balfours, and the Dodds. The Dodds were largely into diplomacy and were or ambassadors and things like that. The Millers seem to gravitate into running government departments and things like that. The Stevensons were largely engineers, and they were the famous engineers who built lighthouses right around Britain, even some here in New Zealand. They built the one at Bluff, for instance, and the internals of the one in Akaroa came from them. But Robert Louis was an aberrant, really, from the family tradition in that case. The Balfours, I think there was one on TV recently in Britain where someone was claiming, in Samoa, claiming to be a descendant of Robert Louis, and they did all this DNA stuff, and they found them over there, and they weren't, of course, related, because he had no children. So I was sort of brought up in it, from a child, and we had quite a bit of correspondence with a gentleman in England at the time called the Reverend Robert Stevenson, who was a first cousin of Robert Louis. I knew him, and he died in 1948, and his letters over the years would give what was going on in the family. So that sort of kept us up to date.
It's all very interesting where people come from when, New Zealand leads all the way back to England and to some very famous people. A meet and greet took place in Motueka this week with Labour's new party president Nigel Hayworth rocking into town to meet up with some of the locals at a cafe. Chrissy Small was there and caught up with new party president and Labour's Tasman MP-elect Damien O'Connor.
I'm here with new Labour Party President Nigel. Nigel, you're here in Motueka and it's a meet and greet. Have you been to Motueka before?
I have. I first came here, I think, in 1989 or 1990. It's changed a great deal since then.
Right. So look, this is a different adventure for you to be here now, and as Party President, why Party President? What made you decide that you would go for that job?
I've been a member of the Labour Party since the 1960s. I've been involved very actively in the party in Britain and in New Zealand, and in New Zealand for the last 30 years. I worked very hard at the level of the policy debate for many years, and when the opportunity to stand for president came, I took it.
You say you've been involved in the party over in the UK. There's been a real swing to the left in their leadership. What do you think of our current leadership now? Do you think we're going on the right track with the Labour Party?
If we're talking about New Zealand, we are definitely on the right track in terms of Andrew Little, who's proving to be a first-class leader, a man who shows himself to be authentic, in tune with the key issues that face New Zealanders. The issue in the UK is interesting. We'll watch and see what happens with Mr Corbyn. He's a response to many years of difficulty within the Labour Party in Britain. He clearly has internal issues about support he has from fellow MPs, but he's also riding a groundswell of criticism about the nature of politics in the UK that goes back again many years. So it's very interesting to see what happens in that context.
Okay, New Zealand politics. We've had quite a few changes in the leadership here in the Labour Party. Do you think we've got the right man for the job this time?
Absolutely. I think Andrew's delivering leadership at the highest level, both within caucus and across the party. It's good to see that when he goes across the country and meets members, there's a realistic accord with him. People understand him, he's authentic, he speaks their language. Being a man who's worked with working people as a trade unionist helps him a great deal. He understands many of the conditions that are facing them. But he's also somebody who is, as I say, absolutely authentic. There is no side or no disguise to him. He is a true man.
Has he got the MPs behind him?
He has. I can say absolutely confidently that the caucus in Parliament is working as a very strong team, working together both in terms of policy and in terms of delivering strategy for the 2017 election. And I must say that I work with them very closely and find them to be an excellent team.
Okay, so will there be a change of government at the next election, do you believe?
Absolutely. I think Mr Key's government is already showing very serious examples of third-termitis, as we call it. I think that he looks increasingly fragile, particularly around things like the flag referendum. Equally, at the same time, we're looking better and better in the polls. We're looking stronger and stronger in terms of our organisation. I think our campaign building is going very well indeed. Our membership is organising earlier and better for the campaign in 2017. I'm very, very hopeful of a change of government in 2017.
What's the scuttlebutt on the street, though? Are people discontent with what's going on, or are they kind of going with the status quo as far as this government goes?
I think that people are increasingly worried about the economy first and foremost. You may have seen the figures on unemployment are rising. You can see that confidence in the economy is falling in the business world. You can see that questions about things like the TPPA and what that will mean for our business and for the sovereignty of New Zealand are beginning to worry people. The secrecy in the TPPA has a much larger effect than I think the government fully understands. So in any number of areas you can see worries emerging that the golden touch of Mr. Key has really faded.
What's your advice to the voters out there? Just get out and vote?
Get out and vote. Voting is important. We're a democracy. Democracies live because people vote. But get out and vote Labour.
Damien O'Connor, we're down here in Motueka for the meet and greet for the new party president. Is he your man?
Look, I think he's done a great job, and he's got a nice quiet approach. This is his first time down here. I've been threatening to get him down and reminding him that he has to come down and go to West Coast Tasman. It's a big area, so he gets some appreciation. I mean, he's got some connections here. And there's a lot for him to learn, but I think he's been doing a very good job. You know, we've got a tough task rebuilding the party, making sure we can get the resources, to take on the national government at the next election. And I think he's the right man for the job.
Okay, what about leadership? We've gone through a few leaders in the old Labour lineup. Is Andrew going to pull the party together for this next election?
Look, I think he's got all the qualities, and it's a big ask for someone who hasn't been in Parliament long to step into the role, but I think he's got the ability to do it. He's got to take his time to learn. He's showing, that he can make the hard decisions. He's not getting tied up in all the frivolous media stuff, and I think he's just got to carry on getting out to meet New Zealanders, and it's only 2 years, a lot of people to meet, but I think when he does that he'll win people over, and Nigel's got to do the work in the background, making sure that the party machine is operating and supporting Andrew and the caucus, and the members of course who carry on doing the good work.
So what is Labour going to offer the people of New Zealand that National haven't been able to?
What we'll provide is leadership when necessary, so that this country runs for people, not just for markets and for people who are opportunists. We've got some people who are earning a lot of money, saying the economy's going really well, and they're right at the top of the pile. And the rest of New Zealanders are working harder. They're not necessarily making progress. The dilemmas in Auckland, of course, are quite unique over house prices, over low incomes, over the inability to actually form a home. That's a third of the population. The rest of us down here are being neglected to some extent. The government's centralised everything in its determination to try and balance the books. It's squeezed every government department, every area of government responsibility, and we're suffering from that. While there's been some, good times with dairy, those things, those times have kind of started to slow down, and so that will have a flow-on impact through the regions. So we are going to ensure that we will offer regions promotion, regions development through, just getting out and spending government money as it should be done, not centralising it all around Auckland, not leaving it to the markets to make decisions, actually showing leadership through government.
Okay, yes, the regions. So the regions, there's a lot of unemployment. It's increasing. What can be done now, though? What could the government do now to stop that?
Well, that's where the government has to start to spend money in the regions. There's roading projects that instead of spending it all around Auckland, that roading money should be out in the regions where it's needed to support, the primary sectors. We use the roads to create the wealth. We need maintenance on those roads. We need improvements. Those where jobs are created. It's the same with education and health. Down in West Coast Tasman, we've got uncertainty over projects that should be going ahead. Westport Hospital, Grey Base Hospital, all of those things should be progressing. They're not. They're being stalled by the government because they want to balance their books, save money, and that's what we will reverse when we get into government.
With Solid Energy and the troubles there, how is the West Coast faring, and what can be done to help?
Well, you know, we've got some big challenges there. We've initiated some think tanks, I guess, encourage people with any good ideas to put them on the table, and then we've got some development funding down there that we can use to progress those ideas. Now, not all of them will be good, but some will be, and we've got to expand our horizons. We're limited only by what is between our ears, and so using our imagination, having the confidence to believe that we can compete in the international marketplace, we can do things with the use of technology that we never thought possible in the past. So, you know, we've got to rethink what our future is. We've got to be determined to make it happen, not just sit back and let the markets determine what's going on in West Coast Tasman and the rest of the regions as the national government thinks is the best way forward.
The RMA, they're looking at cutting some red tape there, and it's been rumoured that builders will be signing off on their own building. What do you think of that?
Look, the national government's in a pickle over the RMA. They've made all these promises about, reducing the compliance costs, making it easier, and then on the other hand saying protecting property rights. Look, whatever you do in the RMA affects property rights one way or the other. I think in spite of all its faults, and some councils are good at implementing it, some are not, the RMA is a basic piece of legislation is sound. I think where the government's determined to try and cut corners, that will end up with leaky homes again. It did that. The national government thought it could deregulate in a number of areas of government responsibility. We ended up with unsafe work environments, Pike River. We've ended up with leaky homes because of deregulated building industry in the past. Can't they learn from their mistakes? And what we say is that we've got to have sensible regulations and guidelines to ensure that whatever we do is done properly and protects the people who purchase those assets, particularly homes and houses into the future.
Something About Losing a Child is a locally written, produced and acted play based on true events with audiences expected to shed some tears. Nelson man Daryl Ware has written this play from his personal journey of suffering loss. He was in the studio talking to Chrissy Small about his new play.
I'm here with Daryl Ware, who is a playwright. Daryl has written a play, and it's on a topic that will affect some people, and some people will know what it's like. And Daryl himself does. The play's called Something About Losing a Child. Daryl, this play, how long has it taken you to put this play together?
I put it together in about 4 or 5 months, I suppose, but it's been sitting there waiting to be written nearly 40 years.
Right. Okay, so it's 40 years since you yourself lost a child.
Well, 1976, yes, 39 years, yes.
Gosh.
But, getting on for 40, yes.
How does it feel? I suppose it still feels like it was yesterday.
If certain conditions occur, yes, it does. I mean, I can always bring it back if I want to upset myself, and sometimes I do. But it's that long in the making. I did write a story about 8 years after, in the early 1980s, and I submitted it for a short story competition, and it got mentioned in dispatches, and was later used by bereaved parents group in Whangarei, where I was at the time. And I thought of that, well, yeah, it can be useful for people, not to heal them, because these things don't heal. They just fit into the rest of your life. It's something you just learn to live with. But I thought, well, yes, and it can help people feel, okay, it has happened to other people. I'm not the only one who's feeling this. Other people feel just these same things.
Right.
As a very recent example of that, when just a few days ago I was trolling up and down the streets of Nelson, Trafalgar Street, Hardy Street, Bridge Street, and in Queen Street, Richmond, and the Richmond Mall, asking people to put the poster in their windows. It surprised me the number of people who said, oh yes, that's happened in my family, or it's happened to somebody I know. So many people have experience of this, if not directly, somewhere else in their family. and it produces reactions. In fact, last week when people said, yes, I'll take it, and you could see them struggling to keep the tears away. Why? Yeah.
So tell me, when is it going to open and where?
It's at Fairfield House on the 8th, 9th and 10th of October, starting at 7:30.
Right.
After the play, there will be opportunity for people to talk about it, and in fact there will be a certain number of counsellors there, people who deal with grief counselling, because it does raise topics not just for the immediate parents, but the often unseen and unacknowledged ones, the grandparents, who, because they were of a generation that learnt to keep their emotions under close check, felt that at the time they couldn't show their own distress to their children who were dealing with enough distress because the child had gone.
Yeah.
So yes, so grandparents often feel this need to be able to touch base with that as well.
So as much as it's going to bring a lot of emotional feelings out there, there's also the chance for a healing.
Yes, it's not an entertainment.
No.
It's an informational thing, and it still will be, as you will when you want to go to a movie that you know is going to deal with an upsetting topic, you still go to it. And
Well, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, we all like our tearjerkers, don't we?
Yes.
Well, so Daryl, look, this is an extraordinary thing to know that someone here in Nelson has written this from the heart, and obviously the actors and actresses involved will be performing from the heart, and the audience, of course, will be touched by the whole episode.
And the end thing is, it is a memorial, it is a statement. My boy lived for a very short time, but this is his memorial, because there isn't a gravestone.
No.
Because I believe that people forget gravestones. How much do you know about your great-great-grandparents' graves, or where they are even?
That's right. Thank you, Daryl.
All proceeds from ticket sales are going to support Nelson's Butterfly Project, which in turn is supporting Daryl's play. Something About Losing a Child is on at Fairfield House for 3 evening performances on October the 8th through to the 10th from 7:30 p.m. A discussion may take place following the presentation with counsellors and trauma-related agencies who will be attending each performance. The community-minded group Voice Nelson has recently put out a survey of rental accommodation standards and costs within the Nelson City area. I spoke with Raven Boss about the results. Raven, could you tell us some of the results of the survey?
Okay, well, we sent out a survey to the parts of Nelson where we knew there was considerable rental properties, and the results were followed some of the anecdotal information that we had. Like, over half of the people responding pay more than 50% for their rent each week, and 30% don't use any winter heating, even if there is heating available, because of this is a cost issue. Some of the rental properties didn't supply any heating, but most had some kind of heating available. Most of the rentals, 82% in fact, of the surveyed rentals are privately owned rather than Housing New Zealand or any of the big agencies. So there's a real variety of ownership sort of thing. We didn't specifically ask who owned them, but they're privately owned. But 63% of the people who responded are concerned to some extent about having to move. So that was the kind of frame of the survey. We didn't ask every question you could think of, but we tried to get a bit of a picture of how things are.
Sure, and I mean, it really points to that people are fairly unsettled in their life, and it's pretty hard to get ahead when they're paying that much in their rent.
Yeah. The issue quickly looks bigger than just renting. The issue is around the standard of rentals, the amount of money people are paying, and also this idea that we still seem to have that renting is temporary and isn't going to go on for very long. People find it hard sometimes to get a rental agreement longer than a year or maybe 2 years. So I think this has been documented by others as well, that affects families, they have to move, etc. So we've got this idea still that people just rent while they're looking for a house, or they rent while they're studying, but I think that hasn't been true for quite a while now, and we need to change our attitude towards that and provide long-term decent renting with a bottom line standard of housing. That's kind of what we sort of started off thinking that, and we've ended up thinking that.
And was there anything in the survey about actually the standard of the house?
Yes, we asked about dampness. That's a biggie. Not everybody was living in a damp house by any means, but a number of people were. It's a hard one to gauge from an answer in a rental. We did ask if there were dampness issues, whether there was heating issues, and security issues and things like that. And people gave various answers. Yes, it's a bit damp in winter too. Yes, there's mould in the corners. So there was a range. Yeah.
And Raven, how did you actually get these people to participate in the survey? Obviously not that many people want to speak out, I should imagine.
No. What we did was we developed a little survey. We tried to make it simple and straightforward, and we basically delivered it to areas in Nelson where we know there's rental housing. So we delivered it around Victory, around the South Nelson area, to Hunanui, the Brook, and actually in the Wood. So it was a kind of like well, let's see what happens when we send this out. And we did some knocking on doors and asking people if they'd like to take part. Where we didn't do that, we left it in the letterbox, and we left instructions about dropping the survey nearby where we had so people could. So it was a bit hit and miss, like all surveys, I guess. But it was just to sort of get a bit of a gauge. Are we, what is the concern out there, or is it just us thinking this? And most people responded to the survey anonymously, but a number responded with their name and phone number saying, we're happy to talk to you. Most people didn't want to be identified. A few were prepared to.
After the break, we'll bring you the latest weather update and some events and happenings coming up from around the region.
I'm Francis from Nelson Auto Glass. We repair all auto glass, stone chips, windscreen replacements, scratch removal.
If you have an auto glass issue, our team will sort it.
Nelson Auto Glass Specialists, 84 Vanguard Street, Nelson.
Edward Gibbon, the bathroom specialists, have a great range of bathroom ideas at their showroom at 23 McGlashan Ave in Richmond. Call in and check out some of the latest bathroom designs and fittings. Edward Gibbon, the bathroom plumbing and drainage supply specialists, 23 McGlashan Ave, Richmond.
On behalf of the team here at Mainland Television News, thank you for joining us, and we'll bring you the latest news and events from around the region again tomorrow.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.